brought you to grow in the first place?
Really nowhere else to go. I'd had a lot of problems myself, and then I met my Fran, and we moved to Ireland, and we were going to create the perfect alternative lifestyle. And then Fran had a psychotic episode at the birth of our first child, and for the next 3 years, it was just in and out of hospital, in and out of hospital, more and more medication. The irony was that I was suffering from what they call an enduring mental illness myself. I was incredibly shy, and I heard voices, and I was promoted to being well because Fran was the person in hospital. And we were just getting nowhere, and just hope went out the window, and we had 3 small kids. Life was totally unmanageable. And one day we heard that there was this new group that we were told it was Schizophrenics Anonymous was starting in Limerick. So we went, and that was it. And it wasn't difficult. I think step one, sort of admitting that there's something wrong with you, initially is very, very difficult to do. But it's something that you do repeatedly and grow. Every time you realize there's an area of your life that needs development, you revert to step one, and you have to confront your pride. You have to be real and say, I do need help in this area. And I even wrote a song about it. I used to think I was alone as someone who didn't need love. It was very humbling to realize that we all need help.
Do you remember your first meeting and how it felt, admitting for the first time in front of strangers that you needed help?
Well, I didn't really admit that for nearly a year. I kind of hid behind Fran because she was obviously, well, in my mind, more obviously in need of help than me. But I remember the first meeting, and what really strikes me is the warmth of the people. It was like a homecoming for me. It was just great. There were about 18 people at the meeting. There was a huge wooden table at Limerick, and obviously there was a structure to the meeting, and everybody looked so normal. It was like a huge weight was lifted, that mental illness wasn't something that you couldn't talk about. The outlook for us professionally wasn't too great. Once you had serious labels like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder or bipolar, we were in our early 20s. So it's not encouraging.
Mm. So you were labelled with schizophrenia yourself then?
Well, I wasn't. I was labelled with pathological shyness, but my mum, who was a doctor, maintained that I had schizophrenia, and I probably did. I was hearing voices. I was very, very paranoid. I used to get all these odd ideas about eye colour, that people with blue eyes came from the sky, and I travelled a lot in India and used to think people with brown eyes came from the earth, and I couldn't make sense. It didn't mean anything, but it was just a thing that I was obsessed with. And so my prognosis wasn't too hot.
Do you remember the first time that you started feeling like you were recovering?
Oh, I do indeed. And that started before I really admitted to the group, I think. The night that I opened up and said, look, I'm not only here as Fran's husband, I'm here for myself. I had this feeling that I was disappear. It was a horrible feeling. I thought, and I can see it, if you go visiting in a psychiatric hospital, people who aren't psychiatric patients will very quickly make it known that I'm not one of them. Everybody knew that I was totally eccentric, for want of a better word, in the group, and that I needed help just as much as Fran did. And so I think it was a relief for them, and it was a relief for me because nothing happened. Life didn't come to an end, and I carried on, and I began to get little tasks that were to do initially with being shy. I was given the task of, if I met people, say hello, and smile at them. I was given a piece out of the program that just says, don't be shy about being shy. And it was like a talisman. It made me laugh every time I read it. I thought, Jesus, I'm not pathologically shy anymore. Don't be shy about being shy. And I continued on with that task, gradually working on my fear of being with other people. And it was, sometimes it was pretty difficult. But you could do it, and you didn't have to get dramatic results.
Hmm. It's funny that you had a fear of being with other people, but you were able to go to the meeting.
It was funny. It was the atmosphere in the meeting was incredibly welcoming, accepting, and non-judgmental. But I was terrified of leadership. If you know where you read the book in the middle routine, I became, Jesus, it's my turn in 4 times, and I'd be absolutely terrified. And then I'd read, and the rest of the meeting. So you problems with you, but I looked forward to the meetings. They were a real lifesaver.
Yeah, it's amazing that you just highlighted something there, that even just reading a line can be a big deal for someone.
Absolutely. The GROW program, I don't think it's valued enough by most people in GROW. It's a whole psychology of mental health rather than mental illness. It's revolutionary. It's the first psychology of mental health. Most psychologies are built from professionals observing people with mental illnesses and trying out different treatments to treat the illness. There is now the positive mental health movement, but I went on to study psychology, and I did a master's in family therapy, and I did a doctorate in recovery in Trinity. And each time I've been back to study, the wisdom contained in the GROW is just quite amazing. There's nothing like it in the world. It's narrative research, exploring people's experience across continents, Australia, America, and Ireland and Europe. Control of feelings isn't just a matter of keeping bad feelings in, which I was great at. A typical Englishman, stiff upper lip, you can get through anything. You just keep going. But I was hopeless. I couldn't put my arms in the air. We were in the charismatic renewal. I used to freeze. I used to dread it if people started putting their arms in the air. If I was at a football match, I'd look at people and think, how do you cheer? I just couldn't do it. When I started getting the idea of a practical task, life itself began to present opportunities. And I often say it, our neighbours had an open house. We lived in a very remote part of West Clare. There was no electricity, no running water in our house when we got there. No television. There was no radio. I never heard it in the neighbour's house. They must have had one. But they used to play cards, and they'd be completely emotionally free. They'd hammer the table and shout at each other, up sticks and wallop carty, and I'd be sitting there thinking, Jesus, how did they do it? And I gradually learned how mental intelligence should be. And they were such fantastic people, and they really became family to us. And then I suppose step one, again, I kept asking people. Where we lived, it was isolated, and we didn't have a phone. Should we move to, because Fran was from a town, and people would say, well, people break down in towns and the country. It doesn't seem to have a lot to do with the way you live. But Joni Baines came over from Australia. He was somebody who'd recovered fully from schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia. And she said, look, it's a bit like being in solitary confinement. You need to move so that Fran can access people in the community. And so we moved. But that was step one again. It was having the courage to ask. But then when she said what I didn't want to hear, that was really difficult. Another time I had to do step one was when I did step 4, ironically. Look at your life and you take inventory, and you look at the good and the bad in yourself, and you accept yourself. And it's done formally very much in Grow, but I was lucky. I had a very good friend who knew me well, and I really trusted, and she agreed to do it with me. And she started off by buttering me up, affirming me for this and that. I was great at this and that, and you know, everybody thrives on praise. And then she said, look, you're getting so involved in Grow, you're also involved in the co-workers of Mother Teresa, you're doing an awful lot. Why don't you go back to college and get a qualification and start working in the area of mental health? And I'd failed my A levels 3 times when I was, because I couldn't study. I just was so mixed up, I could not concentrate. So I had to go back to step one again then and say, well, how do I do it? So then I did an interview in Galway and I got a place. But she also challenged me on my attitude towards leadership and authority. Really, my dad was a fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists in England on the basis of his work. He was a general practitioner. And I just didn't believe the chemical approach to mental health. In Grow, you're asked to give opinions in the group, you're asked to chair the meeting. So it coincided with Grow's approach to leadership. And again, I had to really admit to myself that it was a really big negative, because it was messing up Fran as well. I was saying, come off the meds, you know, you don't need them and you're okay. And she wasn't. And it was only when I backed off that Fran was really able to begin to work on her recovery and eventually come off the medications.
Wow.
And then when I did my master's in family therapy in UCD, it was through the Mater Hospital. There were 5 psychiatrists doing the course as well. You had to have a degree in psychology, medicine, or social work. And there were 5 young psychiatrists there, and they were just lovely. I mean, it completely changed my view of the big bad psychiatrists there lording it over people. And
It seems like the advice that you were seeking from your group members was oftentimes very small things that needed to be changed, like the way you could kind of emotionally free yourself up a little bit, and then also just very practical things like, you know, moving location or starting a course.
There isn't a prescription for recovery. You know, nobody can say this is what you have to do, and you have to have people in the community apart from the group that you get involved with. And then after that, I got a job in a factory when we moved into Ennis. And that was incredible because there was huge camaraderie and fun and football and cursing and throwing food at each other, which again, I couldn't do. I was so bitter, but I learned to do it there. And then going back to college, I fell in love with study. I just loved it. It all made sense. It was all about, I felt it was all about recovery. And then we had a philosophy lecturer who, he started talking about metaphysics, about, you know, what's life about? Why have we been born? What does it mean to be human? And he said, metaphysics is comprehending the incomprehensible, screwing the inscrutable, effing the ineffable. And then one day he said, the reality is there's myself and others in a world we share. And that to me was like the Grow program. It suddenly made sense that we were in this together. And then I took up creative writing, which is another big part of my recovery. I started in a group. I'm still in a poetry group now. I still try and write poetry. And then I suppose getting a job for Grow was another huge turning point. And again, I had to go back to step one and so the work that were terrifying, mainly public speaking, to professionals, to grow groups, later on to staff in Grow. So I went to Toastmasters. So I had to again steel myself. Look, I need help with public speaking Toastmasters say that's what they do. I might think they're a crowd of big shots and I'll hate it, but I'll go. So I went and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I met people in town. Most of them had a huge sense of humor, and it was just really good fun again. So, how are we doing? Are we moving through?
We're good. We're doing good. I was just thinking there when you were talking, it sounds like your recovery was paved with a lot of different challenges from small to big that you took on that you would have shied away from before when you were unwell, but that as you started recovering, you started taking them on, and then you got a
Yeah,
sense of empowerment from actually achieving them, and that just it actually made you grow.
absolutely,
um,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And in fact, now one of the things that I really love doing is public speaking. I could have dreamt of doing that.
yeah,
Now, it all sounds great and wonderful, but in the background, life is still full of problems. So, if you have 4 children, you're going to run into periods where you're worried sick about a particular child. I've had a lot of physical health problems. I'm diabetic. And there's friends die and things happen. Um, but I think another area that I really had to learn as well was um, importance the last few steps of grow, bringing grow out into the community, trying to change the mental health system for the better. So I was invited in 2002 to be one of 2 service user members of the Mental Health Commission, which was new for the government to ask people with experts by experience. And that again, it was quite terrifying. It used to make me paranoid. You'd be at this meeting, there'd be a psychiatrist, a lawyer, a couple of union representatives, a social worker, all there because they know how the system works and they're giving their view. I've been an advisor to Amnesty. There were a group of service users, people like Paddy McGowan from the Irish Advocacy Network, John McCarthy, who was a total character from Cork. He started Mad Pride. Liz Agor, well, she was based in Galway. She's just got her doctorate as well. She's a wonderful ex-service user, if you like. So then I started meeting other people outside Grow who were all trying to improve the system. And that's been a huge part of me. And I think it's, the journey through Grow is you come in as a person primarily looking for help. You begin to discover in yourself that you can help other people. You begin to realize that things you need help with are manageable, that you can put them right. And then you begin to try and change the system, and you have to be strong. So you're kind of hitting against a brick wall, and you get into arguments, and it's full on. Life is full on. But I suppose the really happy ending to mine and Fran's really separate them is that we've been together we've been together over 50 years, would you
wow,
believe? And
congratulations.
yeah, and I think our relationship is better now than it's ever been. Both of us have been totally free of the mental health system since 1987. No visits to psychiatrists, no medication, no. Once or twice we went to marriage guidance a couple of times, which was very helpful. The way I look at it now is that it provides you with, I call it a social womb of people where you can get your need for mental health, and those are things like affirmation, encouragement, challenge, being allowed to make mistakes, being allowed to admit that you're wrong. Step 1 allows you to be open to that healing, but
Yeah,
it immediately leads to 2, 4, 5, 6, and then at the end you're giving back to other people. and you're working on your, if you look at the steps, you're working on your your behavior, what you're doing with your life. You're working on your thinking, you're working on your will, and you're working on your social. And I think grow taps into the good in human beings, which is
Yeah.
in everybody, even though we're pretty messed up as a species.
How would you sum the Grow program up in one word, if you had to?
In one word. Wow. Amazing. I think the Grow program is amazing. It's studying mental health rather than studying mental illness, and leaving mental illness behind and growing into mental health.
How important are the 12 steps in the Grow program?
Well, they're like the skeleton of the Grow program, and then the Blue Book is like the muscles, and they're very important. You know, at times you just have to suffer. You just have to suffer through until things get better, and you have to accept difficulty is that life is fucking difficult. There's nothing wrong with you. This is where you start.
Yeah. And is there anything that has helped you, any line from the book, or even just the kind of essence of a part of the book that has helped you get through whatever challenges you've faced on your journey of recovery?
There's things like going by what you know, not by how you feel. But for me, I keep coming back to the kind of philosophical parts of Grow. But in Grow, it teaches you about love. Love really does make the world go round. And we're all very flawed. We're all extremely flawed as human beings. To be able to think about that is never taught in schools. You know, emotional health is never taught in schools. We're told if you go to a Catholic church, you know, you have to love your neighbor as yourself, but you're not actually, we don't actually stop and what does that mean? And in terms of a Grow group, the good effective grower is the person who's there every week. They're there on time. They'll have done, they'll always have a piece of the program learned, and they're very valuable. There'll be other people in the group who'll probably be a bit or miss a meeting or two. But when they're there, they're all heart, and they're so warm that they kind of bring the meeting alive. And then there'll be the quiet people who, when somebody says, what was your task last week, Mike? And you say, well, I can't remember. The quiet person in the call, I remember, yeah, it was such and such. So they're the reflective people. And you need them all. And that's what education is about, human education. It's about how do we live together, as Colin, myself and others in a world we share. Somebody once said, a mystery isn't something to be solved, it's something to handhold. You know, you confront the mystery and you hold other people's hands, and there isn't any answer to life, but you have to find a way, and you do it through friendship.